From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Okay, so a lot of the fear of overpopulation can be traced back to Malthusian theory, but a lot of the fear in the modern era can be traced back to a single book written in 1968 by a biologist from Stanford named Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book called The Population Bomb. Very, very dystopian, very pessimistic, because he thought that he was talking about an existential crisis. I think it's important to note he wasn't just out with some ulterior motive. He really did believe this, and he made these predictions about what was going to happen if population growth was not crippled as soon as possible. He said, India is doomed. You just have to deal with that. He said 65 million Americans are going to starve to death. And that by one of his more specific predictions, that by the year 2000, England will not exist. So that should hopefully give a little inspiring chuckle to our friends across the pond. Ehrlich was obviously incorrect, but because the book came out in 1968, just a few years before a lot of these policies get Western support, we can tell you his beliefs, the things he espoused in the population bomb, got super popular, especially with the privileged, the hires up at institutions like the World Bank and foundations like Ford and Rockefeller. And so they started putting their money and their expertise where their eyes were. They started taking this book as inspiration and pushing toward making real world steps that they thought were the perfect steps to eliminate the threat of overpopulation. And of course, there is such thing as overpopulation. It's happening, but there are other methods, other ways to stem the tide, I think is what we're saying here. You saw that there's a great Vox article that's based on a really great podcast called Future Perfect. If you want to dive in for more information about this, and full disclosure, they are funded in part by some of those same foundations they explore. And in one of their episodes, they joined with some historians to study the story of a guy named Douglas Insminger, an official at the Ford Foundation. He created infrastructure for these large-scale mass sterilization programs in India. I mean, if we wanted to wax poetic about it, Matt, the way I thought of it is, under a sheep's coat of philanthropy, these powerful organizations went full wolf and intervened in a sovereign nation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did. They went NGO style, baby. It's not an uncommon thing. It's also not surprising that these are the groups that were interested in implementing population control. Again, not saying that, the World Bank and, whatever Rockefeller Foundation or Ford Foundation or whatever are inherently evil. They just are operating from a place of privilege, I would say, from an upper echelon. And you can imagine how, I don't know why it would make them so interested in the eugenics of it, or the culling of it. I don't know. I don't know why, but you can definitely see why they almost, I can't put these thoughts in their head, but you're almost aware that somebody's sitting around a table where this is being discussed, right? There's like a discussion of this book by Ehrlich. It's not happening. You can imagine that there's at least 3 courses. I'm sorry. That's my opinion. And that's not really valid, but that's what I see in my head.
The idea that these people, perhaps with the best of intentions, would have been so far removed from poverty, right?
Yeah.
That they would not have understood the consequences of this approach or the alternatives to it. Or maybe they truly felt this was very much a crisis situation and these inhuman measures were the best recourse. Whatever the case may be, and like you said, Matt, it's tough to know their internal motivations. Whatever the case may be, as India's democracy was suspended, the leadership of the country used the powers and tools of these groups to dangerous and sinister ends. And it did result in the death of people.
Yeah.
By the way, I've been calling this a conspiracy, and it kind of is a conspiracy because maybe the average person in India at the time in a rural community was not aware that this forced vasectomy was brought to them by the World Bank or brought to them by Rockefeller and Ford. But Western institutions and these leaders praised the practice. They loved it. They're on record saying this is great and we're making progress. In fact, the push to do this was so extreme that the president of the United States held aid for ransom. In 1965, then President Lyndon B. Johnson said, look, we're not going to provide any food aid. No more food aid to India, even though you're undergoing the threat of a famine right now, until you put in steps to incentivize sterilization.
Yeah.
So not like family planning, not like just birth control, sterilization.
Exactly. And you'll notice there that we discussed how the book came out in 1968. President Johnson did that in 1965 because population control programs in India had been going on since at least 1951, when there were long-term plans, like 5-year plans that were being put in place. And there's an article on asianstudies.org that you can read all about some of these plans and see how much money was being put in, what organizations were involved. It's titled India, the Emergency and the Politics of Mass Sterilization. Highly recommend you check that out, because it has been going on for a long time, and literally the President of the United States, as Ben said, held help over their heads until that terrible thing started happening on a large scale.
Right. And tying aid to certain preconditions is a common thing in the world of geopolitics, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch, as the economists like to say, in what's known as the dismal science, which is the street name of economics. This has real impact. This has real consequences. So the steps taken by the Indian government promoting IUDs, sterilizations, can be seen as a response to the demands of these powerful organizations, the World Bank, International Planned Parenthood Federation, UN Fund for Population Activities, even USAID got involved. So
that's the United States Agency for International Development?
Oh, that was interscene discretion. That was way off. But yes, they were involved with this. They were directly bankrolling this. And instead of helping people with family planning, these programs immediately forced these lifelong, lasting, permanent contraceptive methods on a very reluctant population. And this leads us to where India is today and maybe tomorrow, because unfortunately, like you said, Matt, this story began before the 75 emergency. And it continued after the 1970s. According to the UN, India alone was responsible for 37% of the world's female sterilizations in 2011. And
we also know many women have died as a direct result of those sterilizations,
which would need to be its own episode at this point. And although sterilization has produced results, fertility rates dropped from, in the 1990s, it was 3.4 and dropped to 2.2 in 2016. It's also, of course, seen a massive amount of controversy. And that's where we get to this point. So incentivizing people to have fewer children to a threshold, it makes sense. But blackmailing a country to make them enact these programs seems pretty dirty. And forcing people to do this seems criminal.
Yeah. And it certainly seems, as per our earlier discussion, like India is on its way to continue this process, just in a different way, right? I think that's what some of the planned stuff for the few states that are putting forward these new incentives to control the population. It just looks a little different. It may be a little less harsh, but in the end, it's still deciding who can and can't have family to a certain extent.
Right. And who should be able to say that? I believe that in the case of, let's say, someone commits a heinous crime, right? Someone's a serial killer, just an extreme example, and they get caught, they go to jail for the rest of their life, or they get the death penalty, what have you. That person has excluded themselves from society. That's the kind of person who doesn't deserve to have the agency to decide whether or not they want to have a family after they've been incarcerated for this stuff. And that's just my opinion. I'm making an example off the top of my head, but I'm only bringing that example up to argue that for the vast majority of the human population, they should have the fundamental freedom or the agency to make those sorts of choices for themselves. We're not anti-vasectomy, right? I know many people who have chosen to be sterilized for one reason or another, and they live happy, fulfilling lives, and are happy with their decision. And I can only assume that a big part of why they are happy with that decision is because it was their decision, not someone else's.
Yep, 100%. Well, this was a downer.
This was a downer. We've got to pepper in some more shows about goblins.
For sure. Can we? Yeah, let's just do that. Let's do it on different, like mythology from D&D every week or so, every couple of weeks.
I would love that. We can have Robert and Joe from Stuff to Blow Your Mind on.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. I play Dungeons and Dragons with Joe. Well, you know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I play D&D in my head. Like, I like to think about the concept of playing D&D, but I just never do it.
Okay, I'll tell you one embarrassing thing, so this isn't a complete downer. And we'll give you something to laugh at, folks, and that's something you can laugh at is me. When I was younger, I didn't get on with most people, and I was very much a recluse, and I bought D&D books, and I read the crap out of them, and I played D&D campaigns with myself as the DM and as 3 different characters. And
that's kind of cool, though. You learned all the different, skills that you can have with the different characters. I bet was there a sorcerer and or wizard, a cleric, and a warrior, or no, a rogue?
Multiple campaigns, man. It got weird. You know what we need to try for real? I'm not kidding. That? Yeah, tell me.
Delta Green. Have you heard of this?
Delta Green. No.
Yeah. No, seriously.
Tell me more.
We're not really allowed to talk about it much, but we should try Delta Green. Seriously. It's
Delta Green. Is this like a limoncello thing?
It's kind of like that, but Cthulhu is involved.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Keep running into that guy. I gotta get different hobbies. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm down.
Okay.
Let's do it. And in the meantime, we want to hear from you folks. What do you think? What is the just decision for leaders of the world or leaders of a country to make in this situation? Should they be allowed to conduct mass coercive sterilization programs? Or we didn't even talk about some of the disincentives. Should people run the risk of losing their job if they don't agree to participate in sterilizations, or if they don't agree to have one themselves? Like, what is the line, and what is the way forward? How do we create a better world for the people here now and the people to come? And if there is a price to be paid, then who ultimately pays that price.